From delta to distortion, tracing the blues rock guitar lineage. Why I think that the guitar today is still highly relevant, and how I'm gonna prove it to you. So we are now in the year 2025, and we're still talking about Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson, yeah, I'm talking about the guy that met the devil at the crossroads down somewhere in the Delta, and supposedly he sold his soul in exchange for supernatural guitar skills. Do you believe that story? Do I believe that story? It doesn't really matter. Fact is that it has been such a powerful story to inspire generations of guitarists, and I'm talking blues guitarists, rock guitarists, and even heavy metal guitarists. Eric Clapton was one of the first in 1967 to pick up the classic Crossroads, written by Robert Johnson, and just turn it into a mainstream, back then, mainstream guitar hit. I'm talking about his version of Cream that he recorded live. And since then, the development of the guitar world is still mythically bound to Robert Johnson and all the other mythical figures around him. I'm talking about guys like Son House. I'm talking about John Lee Hooker, talking about Buddy Guy, Jimi Hendrix, Stevie Ray Vaughan, so many others. I mean, it kind of starts exploding after that. But today I want to have a look at some of those players, and I want to give you some historical context as you're someone that is building her guitar chops. I want to give you some historical background so you understand what you're actually doing here. And I also want to make a strong case of why I think that studying Hendrix is one of the best things you can do for your guitar chops. But why should you even be listening to me? Hey, my name is Ulrich Ellison. I've been a pro guitarist for 25 plus years, and I'm also the founder of TGT Academy, Total Guitar Transformation, where I help guitarists of all backgrounds and ages to reach the fullest potential as improvisers. And yeah, it's a wonderful thing if we can share the music with each other. So here on my channel, I give a lot of tips and perspectives that come out of our TGT Academy. And one of the aspects that doesn't get talked about that much is the inspiration and the history of the electric guitar. If you think about it, it's really fascinating how the guitar developed from just a background instrument. And if you think of the blues, an instrument that was used on the fields to kind of pluck a little bit in the background, to accompany the singers, it turned into a full-on stadium instrument that was played at breathtaking volumes and turned into the modern rock guitar, really. Yeah? If you think about it, it's a fantastic evolution that happened in just, I would say, 20 to 30 years. Pretty amazing. So let's just give a little bit of a lineage for those of you that might not have a wide background in guitar music or in blues and blues rock. let me just name a few of the names that pop into my head if I think of significant guitar revolutions. Uh, there's a little bit of a family tree, I would say. Yeah, let's go back into the Delta blues days. Uh, Back then, there wasn't much chordal playing going on. It was pretty primitive, riff based, or just very simple chords, or just slide guitar. That's what it mainly was. Yeah? And Robert Johnson just came to prominence mainly because of his fantastic life story. You know, he basically became a great guitar player within 1 year and then recorded, I don't know how many songs, like about 20 different songs in a very obscure way, and then pretty much disappeared. And I think he died or so, yeah, died early. So I never studied his whole life or so. So I'm not like by any means obsessive Robert Johnson connoisseur. But what I know is that, you know, he was not one of these musicians that had a long track record and then, you know, just had a certain output during his life. He's just like came and left pretty much like a ghost. Yeah. And I think that has to do a lot why he is so idolized, and you know why all these stories came to be with making a deal with the devil and so on and so forth. In any case, if you are not familiar with the Cream version of his song Crossroads, talking about Robert Johnson, then you need to change this today. I'm not going to play the song here because of copyright reasons. I don't want to get flagged by YouTube. But I personally think that that solo, Clapton solo in Crossroads, is one of the finest examples of a mature blues rock style that has a lot of jazz qualities and real improvisational qualities, but at the same time is very much rock and roll and blues. And so it's one of my favorite versions of Eric Clapton. And yeah, it's worth it to check it out. Yes, Jack Bruce on the bass and Ginger Baker on the drums. It's kind of interesting that a lot of the power trios in these days had jazz drummers. Yeah, that's interesting because Ginger Baker definitely had a jazz background, and so had Mitch Mitchell, and so had a bunch of the other drummers of the power bands of the late 60s. Yes, definitely worth checking out. So then the next guy that I want you to check out, you know, for some reason, Great Britain went into the center of attention in the late 60s. And then Hendrix just showed up at the right time in the right place, pretty much, because he became a spearhead of that movement. I'm talking about the beat movement, but then also the blues rock movement that was started right around 1967. I'm talking about Hendrix coming to London, meeting Eric Clapton there, meeting Jeff Beck, with the Rolling Stones just ready to become rock and roll superstars, with the Beatles releasing Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, so also one of their heavier records going more into rock and roll. There was just a lot in the air in 1967, right on the verge, you could say, before the hippie revolution, you could say, and before Woodstock and all that happened. And so the guitar was truly electrified around that time. Think of Bob Dylan, the troubadour and, you know, acoustic guitar player, who suddenly took his band electric, was booed, and his fans hated it, but he played electric, and he surely recognized the signs of the times, and so in that sense became an inspirational spearhead too of that movement of making the guitar front and center, making it loud. I cannot have this talk and these thoughts here without mentioning The Who and their guitarist Pete Townsend, of course. Yeah? Pete Townsend and Jimi Hendrix were actually the first two guitarists to ever play a Marshall amplifier. Because Jim Marshall was getting started right around that time as well. And Pete Townsend and Hendrix basically were in a volume war, yeah? Not only volume, but also rockstar war, basically. Yeah? They would destroy their instruments. You know, if you think of the Monterey Pop Fest, where The Who, I think, went on before Hendrix, completely destroyed the whole backline. And then Hendrix couldn't just destroy stuff to, to top that performance, but he actually had to light his guitar on fire. So that's what he did. Now, very famous moment in music history, Hendrix with the burning guitar. It just happened mainly because of that rivalry between him and Pete Townsend. So it's just very interesting, if you think of the role of the guitar and how it moved more and more front center. And I would argue that Jimi Hendrix was one of the spearhead figures to carry the guitar forward into the rock star age. There were very few guitarists after Hendrix that weren't in some way influenced by him. You think of the 70s and then later on the 80s, you think of the whole heavy metal movement, I'm thinking of Edward Van Halen, I'm thinking of Yngwie Malmsteen, Steve Vai, and all those guys coming out of the woodworks. All this wouldn't have been possible without the pioneering work of Jimi Hendrix. And that's why I think it's very important that if you are aspiring blues or rock guitarist, that you should spend some time with the Hendrix vocabulary. There's gonna be so many guys telling you so many things here on YouTube and generally in the guitar world. And there's so many cool guitarists and cool licks to chase. But I just want to tell you, Hendrix was a great songwriter. He wrote some great songs. He sang his own songs. He played in the power trio. He used the guitar with his own songs in a very unusual way for back then and even today still, that is rhythmically and melodically, harmonically on a very high level. And so in that sense, he truly pioneered the role of the guitar in modern rock music, I would say. Yeah? Check out his music, learn some of his vocabulary. If you are interested in getting a kickstart with that and just learning some of the essential Hendrix phrasing and lick vocabulary, then I got something special down here for you. I'm talking about my Hendrix lick bundle set, where I collected some of my favorite Hendrix phrases that inspired me the most. And I hope you're gonna get a lot out of that. So just click on that link down in the comments and download that lick bundle set. But let's make the connection back to Robert Johnson and the meaning of the blues. And now we're talking about the new generation of guitarists, talking about Jack White. He definitely has a strong connection to the Delta blues days. And he is a good figure to mention when talking about the recent revival of the blues, of the Delta blues, away from the 80s heavy metal shredding kind of days, and even away again from grunge and kind of, treating music as almost like an anti-statement where you don't have to be a musician to be a virtuoso in some way. Jack White kind of makes the connection back, and not only him, there's other guys too that do this in different ways. Even Joe Bonamassa is an example, or John Mayer would be an example too, to bring the guitar back into somewhat of a mainstream. If you don't know Jack White, a great way to get to know him is by watching the documentary It Might Get Loud, where he sits together with Jimmy Page and The Edge of U2, and the three have just a lovely conversation about playing guitar, about sounds, about the role of music. And so it's a wonderful little documentation. And yeah, it's just really great to see that guitar is still front and center in 2025. And there's new forms of expression. I think the dirty blues rock guitar has a new status today than it had, for example, in the 90s. I think there was a time where this type of bluesy guitar playing, was maybe a little bit out, but I think we're definitely back in again. And in many ways, this honest expression to express yourself purely is still as valid today as back in the Robert Johnson days. I hope you found my YouTube video today entertaining and thought-provoking. This was very unprepared. I just said like, okay, I'm just gonna sit down and think about the history of the electric guitar a little bit. And if there are even just a few names that you haven't heard of before, then just go and listen to stuff. Yeah, you gotta go and just listen and research and get inspired, because that's what we're all here for. And don't forget, if you want that Hendrix lick bundle set, then click on the link down here in the comments. In that sense, keep on rocking and keep on watching this episode here next.